concerning. What was more concerning was they transported over 250 patients that collapsed or that needed medical aid on this 26-mile course. They basically shut down the EMS system in the city of Chicago that day. They needed to respond with surrounding communities, a pre-plan they had in place. But as an example of patients that were created over a very large geographic area that needed care in a very short amount of time and overwhelmed the system. And again, this kind of just comes back to the point, regardless of the event, whether it's a heat event at a marathon, whether it's a tropical cyclone, or whether it's a drought or fire or flood, regardless of those events, planning in advance and having an all-hazards approach will put the community in a better position to respond to these events because they're often on the same common themes that need to be addressed at the EMS level to be prepared. Jumping ahead to data, I mentioned earlier, outcome being the third theme I think that's important to think of in the future, and recognizing that we need data to be able to make better decisions for our patients, particularly outcome data or clinical data, and understanding it. When we look at the continuum of care, we're doing quality improvement. Without information, we really don't know where we are, and it's really hard to make good decisions about how to improve upon care. This report is dated. This is, for those in the room that may remember, Institute of Medicine report in the United States that came out more than 10 years ago and talked about both emergency medical care as well as pediatrics and emergency medical services. And really what this quote that I took out I think is really important, the importance of data, and basically saying without data, it's hard to make decisions at the local level, at the regional level, in our case in the US at the state level or national level. And we really didn't have a lot of data at that time looking at trauma, for example. We have better data today than we did 10 years ago, but we have a lot of opportunity for improvement. And not having patient care outcomes, linking EMS data with hospital data is really a big weak spot. It's hard to understand what happens to a patient if you're not tracking them through the final continuum of care. And that's really what this report pointed out. We need to do a better job. And I think this applies not just in the US, but elsewhere. Certain parts of the world do a much better job from a public health standpoint in terms of collecting patient care outcomes, particularly for time-sensitive conditions. Stroke, STEMI, trauma, cardiac arrest. It really is important that that be hardwired into a public health system. And in some communities, there's a lot of room for opportunity. I think this statement makes sense. It's hard to really have impact on a condition if you're not measuring it. And arguably the first step to doing quality improvement is measurement. If you use cardiac arrest as an example, and what we call the chain of survival, each of these steps being important, we need to measure that. We need to feed it back at the community level to see how are we doing with our bystander CPR rate in the community. How often are we providing public access defibrillation? How quickly is the ambulance getting there? What is the care that's provided after the professionals arrive on the scene? What is the care the patient gets at the hospital? Following that patient through the system requires metrics, and looking at that data on a continual basis to do improvement is essentially what we see here on the slide. This continuum of measurement, benchmarking or comparing ourselves against others or reference points, and then making changes in the system and feeding it back to the providers so we can improve care for the next patient. This is really an important concept. This is obviously for resuscitation, but you could say the same for trauma. You could say the same for pediatric, critical care events. The ability to measure this and have outcome measures is a starting point and really essential. And essentially,